Good morning. Nice morning. Every morning's a nice morning. Every day is a good day. Every day is a day that the Lord hath made, and we're going to rejoice. Particularly this morning, we have the opportunity to study together, and we have the opportunity to worship together this morning, so this is a great morning. Our study this morning continues in Ezekiel, the 8th chapter and the 11th verse this morning. Ezekiel 8 and 11. Now remember what Ezekiel is all about. Ezekiel is about kind of three themes. One is that God is going to punish Israel. And then God is not only going to punish them, but he's going to tell them why he's punishing them. And then thirdly, the theme is that the Jews would learn that God is the creator. God is the God of the universe. Jehovah God is their God, and that those idols that they've been worshiping are nothing. And as we look at the children of Jacob, they were always dabbling in idolatry. You remember Jacob's one of his wives, Rachel, stole some gods, some kind of images. You know, when they went from her father and mother and so forth and went into the land of Canaan. And they dabbled in idolatry for all those years. They just continued to dabble in idolatry, and then they got steeped in idolatry. I mean, they went full force into idolatry. And in the 8th chapter of the book of Ezekiel, we have God transporting in a vision, transporting Ezekiel to Jerusalem. And the idea there seems to be that God wanted Ezekiel to see just how bad things were in Jerusalem. How bad the idolatry was part of the culture. And he says in Ezekiel, the 8th chapter, several times, he says, look. It's kind of God was saying, Ezekiel, look down here, what's going on? Well, you know, Ezekiel was contemporary with Jeremiah. And Jeremiah was in Jerusalem talking to them about their rebellion, talking to them about Jerusalem's going to be destroyed. The temple's going to be destroyed unless you shape up. They didn't shape up. And then we had Daniel, this contemporarily, over in the Babylonian throne room. And so we had Jeremiah in Jerusalem preaching. We had Ezekiel in among the captives, and then we had Daniel working in the king's room. You know, he was right there next to the king. And you can imagine, I suppose that there were messages between Daniel and Ezekiel. Ezekiel out in the countryside with the captives, and Daniel in the throne room. I can imagine there were some communications among Jeremiah and Daniel and Ezekiel. That's my speculation, but it would just seem normal, that people gravitate to like people of like kind, and of course the Jews had a network, and the Jews were, a body politic that would be communicating one with another. And so in this segment, beginning with verse 11, actually we want to note in verse 1 to get the sense here again as we begin our class. And it came to pass in the 6th year, in the 6th month, in the 5th day of the month, as I sat in mine house, and the elders of Judah sat before me, that the hand of the Lord fell there upon me. And he had this vision then again, and he was transported to Jerusalem. That is, he had this vision of being transported to Jerusalem, and the glory of God, appeared to him, so that he knew this was of God. And in verse 6 he said, "Furthermore unto me, Son of man, seest thou what they do, even the great abominations that the house of Israel committeth here?" Where? In the sanctuary, in the very area where the presence of God was there. The presence of God was there in above the Ark of the Covenant there, the Ark of the Covenant, and then we had the mercy seat and the cherubims. What are cherubims? Cherubs or cherubims? What were they? Remember back in the Garden of Eden, God, when man was expelled from the Garden of Eden, what guarded the tree of life? What God put in charge there? The cherubim. So the cherubim is a, I guess we might think of is a very close angelic, very close to God, and has particular commissions from God. And so the very presence of God was in the temple. But as we unfold this chapter, in the next chapter, particularly in the next chapter, we see that Ezekiel sees that God removes himself from that Ark of the Covenant, that place where his presence was, and Ezekiel sees God moving out of Jerusalem, out of the temple, and then out of Jerusalem. Now, that would have been an awful, that would have, it would seem to me that would have been an awful thing for Ezekiel to experience. God moving out of the temple, moving out of Jerusalem. And so what do you have if God is moving out of the temple? You have a building. You just have an ordinary building, because God is gone there. Well then, in verses 9, in verse 9 he says, "And he said unto me, Go in, behold the wicked abominations that they do here, in the very temple." So I went in, by vision here. I went in and saw, and behold, every form of creeping things and abominable beast, and all the idols of the house of Israel portrayed upon the wall around about. They were worshiping nature, the animals. We think of people today that have pay homage and worship in various societies, worship cows, worship alligators, crocodiles, worship, nature. Well, they were there worshiping. And then in verse 11, where we start today, "And there stood before them 70 men of the ancients, of the house of Israel. Now the 70 men of ancients, in their civic matters, or in their, religious civic matters, the Sanhedrin, the group of 70, seemed to be, the ruling group. And here the 70 men, the people that were supposed to be leading religiously, morally, and otherwise, these 70 men of ancients of the house of Israel, and in the midst of them stood Jaazaniah, the son of Shaphan. Now, Shaphan was contemporary with Josiah and helped with the restoration. And I think this might have been the same Shaphan, but it's his son. That is Jaazaniah that was involved in this. Every man with his censer in his hand. A thick cloud of incense went up. What's this censer? What's this censer being? This thick cloud this thick cloud that went up. Well, it was they were paying homage, worship to these idols. Thick cloud of incense went up. Then said he unto me, is God saying to Ezekiel, Son of man, hast thou seen what the ancients of the house of Israel do in the dark? Every man in the chamber of his imagery? For they say, the Lord seeth us not, the Lord hath forsaken the earth. Here again, God is saying, Ezekiel, look at what's going on. I mean, this is awful. And he's saying, Ezekiel, look. And they say, they have the saying, or the idea, or at least they talk about this. The Lord seeth us not; the Lord hath forsaken the earth. Now it wasn't going to be long until God was going to forsake the temple in Jerusalem, and so it's kind of a prophecy there. Well, that wasn't what they were looking for. And he said unto me, turn yet again, and thou shalt see greater abominations that they do. So he seems to take Ezekiel on this journey where, there's a level of abominations, and then there's going to be greater abominations, and then you're going to see even greater abominations. Then he brought me to the door of the gate of the Lord's house, which was toward the north, and behold, there sat women weeping for Tammuz. Now this is some kind of a god where there were sexual rituals involved. Many of those gods that they worshipped had to do with Baal had to do with immoral sexual immorality. There was that sort of thing. And there these women, Jewish women, weeping for this God, no God, this no God God. So they were not only, this wasn't a casual thing, you see. They were really into it. Causing, crying, weeping. Then said he unto me, hast thou seen this? Oh, Ezekiel, look, see, O son of man, turn thee yet again, and thou shalt see greater abominations than these. So It gets progressively worse in his vision, his journey through this vision. And they brought me into the inner court of the Lord's house, and behold, the door of the temple of the Lord between the porch and the altar. There were 25 men with their backs toward the temple of the Lord. No, they ought to have their faces toward the temple, but they had their backs toward the temple of the Lord and their faces toward the east. Now, what do you suppose that's all about? Temples toward the east. And they worship the sun toward the east. Worship the creation rather than the Creator. Now, isn't that stupid? Then said he unto me, Hast thou seen this? God saying, Ezekiel, did you see that? It's as if God's taken him on a tour of the abominations of the Jews, his fellow Jews. And he says, Is it a light thing to the house of Judah that they commit the abominations? Is this of no significance? Is this of no import? Is it a light thing that they would do this? Ezekiel, is this a light thing? Then he said unto me, Hast thou seen this, O Son of Man? Is it a light thing? Is it just something, casual? No, it's intense. Is it a light thing to the house of Judah that they commit the abominations which they commit here? For they have filled the land with violence. Now, what happened when the Jews left the Ten Commandment law? Think about, and of course the Ten Commandment law was, the foundation. It was kind of the constitution for all the other ordinances that the Jews were to keep under the law of Moses. But what happens when mankind leaves those basic laws? Killings, covetousness. What happens? People killing each other. Innocents being killed. All kinds of immoral conduct. A social order that it would be hard to live in when mankind forsakes those basic laws of God, you see. For they have filled the land with violence. That's the result of violation of God's ordinances. And have returned to provoke me to anger. And lo, they put the branch to the nose. Now, I don't know what that branch to the nose really meant, but you think about God's, when the Jews worshipped and did so according to the law of Moses, it was the smoke of the sacrifices and the incense was how does the Bible describe that? It was a sweet, what, Tim, was a sweet smelling savor? Sweet. Well, he's putting the branch to the nose. That was probably some expression that the Jews understood, or they would have understood. It may have been that God was saying, instead of this being a sweet-smelling savor, it just stinks. Or it may have been, the expression may have had something to do with the Jews turning up their nose to God. That expression, turning up your nose. What do we mean when we say, well, he's turning up his nose to me? What does that mean? Snubbing. saying, yeah, get away from me. They were saying, God, get away from me. They said that God had abandoned them. Well, God is about to abandon them. So that branch of the nose, take your pick of what that means. But whatever it meant, it wasn't good. It was not good. Therefore will I also deal in fury. Mine eyes shall not spare, neither will I have pity. And though they cry in mine ears with a loud voice, yet I will not hear them. I'm not going to hear them. Well, that's unfortunate, because in war, there's collateral damage, right? Innocent, people not in the military, civilians, people not in the military, there's collateral damage. And there's going to be collateral damage here, because innocent children are going to be starved, killed, right? And in God's system of justice, because of crimes, sin, whatever, in God's system of justice, there's no alternative. I will not hear them, even though they cried with a loud voice. And then while Ezekiel was on this vision, this tour of Jerusalem, looking down into the dark recesses of the social order there. First in chapter 9. Chapter 9 is going to be an interesting scenario and the interesting narrative, because he's going to, at least in the first part of chapter 9, he's going to depict this destruction scene, the narrative of the destruction. And of course this is prophetic in terms of what's going to happen when God sends the armies of Babylon in to destroy the city. So he cried also in mine ears with a loud voice. He's kind of getting Ezekiel's attention, right, with a loud voice, saying, cause them that have charge over the city to draw near, every man with his destroying weapon in his hand. Now, in this vision, there's this narrative that's being played out here. Gives Ezekiel a sense of what's going to happen. And by the way, was this vision that Ezekiel was experiencing, was that just only to inform Ezekiel? No, because we're going to see when he's transported out of this vision back to his actual surroundings, he reveals all this to the elders there, the people that he was instructing. He cried also in mine ear with a loud voice, saying, cause them to have charge over the city to draw near, even every man with his destroying weapon in his hand. And as I said, this is prophetic prophecy here. It's being, because at this very moment, Jerusalem was not being destroyed, but it was about 6 years. In about 6 years, this destruction would in fact happen. And behold, 6 men came from the way of the higher gate, which lieth toward the north, and every man a slaughter weapon in his hand, and one man among them was clothed with linen, with a writer's inkhorn by his side, and they went in and stood beside the brazen altar. The brazen altar being part of that temple furniture. Now this guy with the inkhorn, that ink can write and it can mark. Well, we're going to see some marks on people here. And the glory of God of Israel has gone up from the cherub, whereupon he was to the threshold of the house. Now here's this cherub appearing, this angelic being, a messenger of God, in God's government. It had gone up from the cherub, whereupon he was to the threshold of the house. And he called to the man clothed with the inkhorn, or with the linen which had the writer's inkhorn by his side. And the Lord said unto him, now remember, this cherub is going to figure into this narrative. And the Lord said unto him, go through the midst of the city, through the midst of Jerusalem, and set a mark upon the foreheads of the men that sigh, and that cry for all the abominations that be done in the midst thereof. There were some in this social order that remained true to the law of Moses, remained true to God in all of this corruption and idolatry. And so they received a mark in this prophecy there. There were going to be some that were going to be spared. Verse 5, and to the others he said in mine hearing, go ye after him through the city, and smite. Let not your eye spare, neither have ye pity. And you see, this is prophetic of what was going to happen when the Babylonians come in. That there would be some spared. Through the providence of God, there would be some spared. The cream of the crop, I think, we might think of that in that way. Slay utterly, old and young, both maids and little children and women, but come not near any man upon whom is the mark. And begin at my sanctuary, begin with the temple area. Start your movement from the temple area and go throughout the city. And he said unto them, defile the house. Now, here's the temple, been there for 400 years, and the admonition to the Jews was, don't defile the temple, right? Was that right, preacher? Don't defile the temple. But now he said, defile the temple. We'll see that they're going to bring dead bodies into the temple. And of course, that was that was defilement. That was defiling. Why would God do that? Well, God moved out. You see, the way we think of the way we as humans think. He said unto them, defile the house and fill the courts with the slain. Go ye forth. And they went forth and slew in the city. Now, obviously, what happened was the Babylonians did this. But this vision was a confirmation that the Babylonians were going to destroy the city of Jerusalem and kill and maim and so on. Verse 8 then, and it came to pass while they were slaying them. Now, you can imagine Ezekiel's his emotions, his seeing what was going to happen here. And in his vision, he saw what happened in that vision. You can imagine his emotions at that point. And it came to pass while they were slaying them, and I was left, that I fell on my face and cried and said, "Oh, Lord God, wilt thou destroy all the residue, or all the remainder of Israel in their pouring out of thy fury in Jerusalem?" God, are you going to wipe every last one of them out? Then he said unto me, "The iniquity of the house of Israel and Judah is exceedingly great." Now some people have, some agnostic and atheistic people have said, God must be a terrible being to wipe out women and children, innocent. But what had the Jews been doing all along? But what had they been doing all along about killing and so forth? The streets of Jerusalem flowed with blood under the rule of Manasseh, one of the kings of southern Judah. And so I suppose the atheist, the agnostic would say, well, it's okay if mankind kills and maims the innocents, but it's not okay for God to do it, you see. Well, he says the iniquity. Things are so bad that the iniquity of the house of Israel and Judah is exceedingly great, and the land is full of blood. It's already full of blood, you see. It was already full of blood. Blood of innocence. And the city full of perverseness. Full of corruption that causes the social order to be a terrible place to live. And the city full of perverseness. For they say, the Lord hath forsaken the earth, and the Lord seeth not. They say, in the temple they're worshiping these nature and worshiping the sun. They're thinking, well, God doesn't see all this, but and that God had actually forsaken them. Well, that was kind of a prophecy that fulfilled that they didn't want to see, because God did forsake Jerusalem. He did move out of Jerusalem, so to speak. And as for me also, mine eyes shall not spare. Now, God is saying, corruption, death, killing of innocents. You've done it yourselves. And for me also, mine eye shall not spare, neither will I have pity. Why? Why wouldn't he have pity? I will repay their way upon their head. They were going to get what they sowed. They sowed corruption and murder and killing, and what are they going to get? They're going to be punished. And behold, the man clothed with linen. Now in this narration here, and behold, the man clothed with linen, which hath had the inkhorn, that is that writing substance, and had put the marks on the heads of certain people, saying, I have done as thou hast commanded. So that ends that particular scene. And this man, this image, or this human figure that was in the vision here, the guy dressed with the linen, he says, well, I've completed the task. And then, in chapter 10, then I looked, and behold, in the firmament that was above the head of the cherubims. Now remember, the cherubims were involved in this. In its previous scene, the head of the cherubims there appeared over them as it were a sapphire stone, and as the appearance and the likeness of a throne. Now, we're going to have somewhat of a repeat of chapter 1. In chapter 1 of Ezekiel, Ezekiel saw this living creature that had, wheels, and it had wings, and it had feet, and it had faces, and so on, that depicted the awesomeness and the glory of God. And this is going to be, that's going to be revisited. That vision is going to be revisited upon Ezekiel. And we notice this in chapter 1. And he spake unto the man, clothed with linen. This is the one that, put the marks on the foreheads. And said, go in between the wheels. Now, get in connected up with this image, this living creature that he saw in chapter 1 and repeated here in chapter 10. Go in between the wheels, even under the cherub, and fill thine hand with the coals of fire from between the cherubims, and scatter them over the city. And he went in my sight. So this guy with the inkhorn, the reservoir of ink, and the guy that did the marking, he was to go to this living creature that Ezekiel saw in chapter 1 and then repeated here. And you get some coals, hot coals. Well, now the cherubim stood on the right side of the house when the man went in, and the cloud filled the inner court. And then the glory of the Lord went up from the cherub and stood over the threshold of the house. Now, what's happening here now? Then the glory of the Lord, verse 4, went up from the cherub and stood over the threshold of the house. So the glory of God is moving here. From the area of the Ark of the Covenant, that Holy of Holies, moving out. The glory of the Lord went from the cherub and stood over the threshold of the house, and the house was filled with the cloud, and the court was full of the brightness of the Lord's glory. And the sound of the cherubim's wings was heard even to the outer court, as the voice of the Almighty when he speaketh. Remember, the cherubs were agents of God, heavenly beings. Verse 6, and it came to pass that when he was commanded, it came to pass that when he commanded the man clothed in linen, saying, take fire from between the wheels, from this living creature here, and from between the cherubims. Then he went in and stood beside the wheels. And one cherub stretched forth his hand from between the cherubims unto the fire that was between the cherubims, and took thereof, and put it into the hands of him that was clothed with linen, who took it and went out. And there appeared in the cherubims the form of man's hand under the wings. And when I looked, and behold, the four wheels by the cherubims, and one wheel by one cherub, and another wheel by another cherub, and the appearance of the wheels was as the color of beryl stone. And as for their appearance, they four had one likeness. Now remember, this is describing this from chapter 1 of Ezekiel. And for their appearances, they four had one likeness, as if the wheel had been in the midst of the wheel. Same as in chapter 1. When they went up on the four sides, and they turned not as they went, but to the place whither the head looked they followed it. And they turned not as they went. Again, chapter 1. And their whole body, and their backs, and their hands, and their wings, and the wheels were full of eyes round about, even the wheels that they four had. And the wheels, and as for the wheels, it was cried unto them in my hearing, O wheel. And every one had four faces. The first face to the face of the cherub. Second face was the face of man. And the third face, the face of a lion. The fourth face of an eagle. And the cherubims were lifted up. This is the living creature that I saw by the river Cherubims, chapter 1. And when the cherubims went, the wheels went. And when the cherubims went, the wheels went by them. And when the cherubims lifted up their wings to mount up from the earth, the same wheels also turned not from beside them. And when they stood, these stood. And when they were lifted up, and lifted up themselves also, for the spirit of the living creature was in them. Then the glory of the Lord departed from the threshold of the house. God's presence left the temple to the threshold of the house, and now what? And from the threshold of the house, it stood over the cherubims. And the cherubims lifted up their wings, and mounted up from the earth in my sight. When they went out, the wheels also beside them, and every one stood at the door of the east gate of the Lord's house, and the glory of the Lord of Israel was over them. God was on the move, so to speak. This was all this imagery, all this vision was to give Ezekiel the sense, the reality that God was leaving Jerusalem. His presence was leaving Jerusalem. In verse 20, and this is the living creature that I saw under the God of Israel. This is the living creature that I saw under the God of Israel by the river of Cherubims. And I knew that they were cherubims. Every one had four faces apiece, and every one four wings. And the likeness of the hands of man were under their wings, and the likeness of their faces was the same faces that I saw by the river Cherubims. Their appearances and themselves, they went every one straight forward. Now, all of this imagery has to do with giving Ezekiel a sense of the awesomeness of God. And God was moving out. His presence is moving out of the temple, eventually out of Jerusalem. And when that happened, Jerusalem was nothing more than a shell. It was nothing more than any other nation on earth is subject to destruction without God's presence being there. So, we'll begin then next time with chapter 11.